I'm very glad you had time to fit me in because you were out cycling. I was like, do
I
not miss this
was,
interview,
I
Alistair.
was.
And I'm very excited about your diaries because I'm in it 6 times.
I
So
know, although I don't really feel that I convey your full personality.
it's very hard to convey my full
I
personality.
know, I know.
Well, listen, we're not going to talk about the leaders' debates very much. All to say is that we had a very good laugh, and Alistair was a very brutal David Cameron, and I was a very good Nicola Sturgeon. But
Yeah.
we'll just leave it at that. But what is fascinating about the book? It charts this very difficult period for the Labour Party, and also matches kind of quite a lot of difficult period things you're going through personally as well. It's that 2010 to 2015 period. We have the Labour Party falling out of power after this, huge term in office. You have the highs of the Olympics. You talk about your joy at seeing this country at ease with itself, people smiling at each other on the tube. Then, and as a Labour person, you see the rise of the Conservative Party. Ed Miliband wins. You were very much a David Miliband supporter, and you see Labour sort of beginning to get into the habit of losing. Do you think those years really started seeing Labour kind of almost get addicted? It feels now to the you were part of a winning Labour team. Do you feel they're the years that Labour got used to losing?
Well, as you say, we were in power for a long time. I mean, people forget that Tony was the first leader to win two full terms, let alone three, and to serve those through. And look, Ed had been part of a winning team, in that he was very much part of the Gordon team, and I know he went off to America for a bit, so, but I think what happened in a way is that we'd been in power, won three elections. People tired of us. Iraq had been unpopular. Student fees had been unpopular. And of course, the Tories. This is where, as you know, I used to argue with Ed the whole time. I do think that the Tories managed to pin the crash on Labour. And that, I think, damaged us. And I don't think we did nearly enough to push back on that. And added to which, I just think that the country was changing maybe in ways that we didn't fully understand. I mean, of course, the other thing that's in this volume that you didn't mention in all the big things, the big events that are in it, and I understand why, because it doesn't really feature that heavily, is Cameron announcing the referendum on Brexit,
Yeah.
which sort of comes and goes because people just thought, oh, well, he's doing that just to keep his party quiet, but it's never going to happen. And if it does happen, we're never going to go out. And so I think the country was changing. Um, I thought, as you say, I was very much somebody who thought that David would have been the better leader of the party. But I thought back then, and I think now, that Ed has got strengths. But I think the public decided fairly early on that they were going to back Cameron with a majority when it came to his second time around.
Do you think David Miliband could have beaten David Cameron?
Well, I do, but the truth is, we'll never know. David didn't win, and but what's interesting, and I know you've read the book because I sent it to you early, but I think that it is interesting how, as I'm going around the place, just talking to members of the public or people outside politics that I talked to, particularly people in sport, they were all just saying all the time, "You got the wrong Miliband. Ed's not going to do it." I remember the conversation with Dave Brailsford, the British head of British cycling, and he just, every time I saw him, he said, "Look, you go on about having a sporting mentality. You completely understand. If this was sport, you'd move, you'd change, you'd get something done." But of course, I try to explain to him politics is often very, very different. So yeah, I think David, was a formidable political talent, but he didn't win. So that's that.
And it's I mean, you talk about what's really interesting is like you do. I think there is some humility, I think, in these diaries, which is an acknowledgement that Labour is increasingly over this period of time, and obviously in the run up to 2010 as well, just becoming sort of less and less in touch with what the public is thinking on things. And you mentioned, David Miliband, maybe he might have been better. And of course, I worked for Ed. I'm very, close to Ed, but,
Yeah.
this is an objective conversation. But the party in that time, we had Ed Miliband, then of course we had Jeremy Corbyn, which really, really, changed the party a lot. Now we have Keir Starmer. How do you think the Labour Party ever moves away from increasingly becoming so internally focused and tries to get that granular feel of what the public is thinking, because it does feel like since 2010 we're moving further and further and further away from the party. And I say we because it's no great surprise to people. I am obviously, I have worked for the Labour Party.
Yeah. Look, I think it's really difficult where we are now, and a lot of it I don't understand. So, for example, I honestly don't understand why some people think that Boris Johnson's a good prime minister, but some people do. I really don't understand how anybody can look objectively at what's happened in relation to Brexit and say that it's not damaging the country. So I don't know whether that means I'm out of touch, but it certainly means that I don't fully understand what's happening. Whereas I think that, 1997, 2001, to a lesser extent 2005, where it maybe felt that, we were coming to the end of our time, but certainly 97, 2001, I felt that I personally, and that we as a group around Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and John Prescott and all the others, I felt we really had a sense of the country and the public. And I think we had the ideas for that. We had the leadership for that, particularly with Tony. And I think we had the policies for that. And, if you'd have said to me back then, oh, well, within a decade, I mean, this volume, 2010 to 2015, it ends 6 years ago. And yet it feels like a different planet.
Yeah.
If you'd have said to me when we were in our pomp, as it were, well, there'll come a time when you'll have Boris Johnson, Old Etonian, Bullingdon Club, blah, 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 up against Keir Starmer leading the Labour Party, and the Tories will be 16 points ahead with the working classes, I'd say, well, that's just not going to happen because, they're just a bunch of toffs and off they go and blah, blah, blah. So I don't know is the honest answer, Ayesha, but what I do know is that when, I was talking to David Lammy the other day for our podcast, and thank you, by the way, for you came on the podcast as well. Thank you for that. It was very funny. But I was talking to David Lammy, and he was making the point that when you lose as badly as Labour lost last time round, you've got to restart the conversation. You can't just sort of say, this is what infuriates me about a lot of the Corbynistas who still go on about, we have to just go back to what Jeremy was saying and what have you. You have to restart the conversation. You have to earn the right to be listened to again. And that's a big job. It's like, and I feel at the moment that Labour they're just not on the pitch in the way that they need to be heard and to be listened to. And so I think it's going to be a long haul.
How do you think Labour does that? Because, I mean, look, I think you have admitted here that, you feel out of touch with how the country is going. And certainly, let's say on Brexit, the Labour Party and Keir Starmer was very much against Brexit, and you were against Brexit. The country was...
I still am.
You still are, and you are ardently against Brexit. Doesn't that mean that Labour, and all wings of Labour do feel like they're completely out of touch with where the public is right now?
No, I don't.
It's what's happening in Scotland, whether it's in the Red Wall, it just does feel that no wing of the Labour Party is in touch with the public.
Well, Scotland is a massive problem for Labour because we've never, ever won. Even when we were winning three-figure majorities, a lot of the numbers in that were in Scotland. And now you're coming up to the Scottish elections and the chances are that Labour are going to, they're probably going to come third. And likewise, I hate the way we talk about the Red Wall as though these northern seats are all kind of homogenous. And, you've got a lot of people up there who hate Brexit as well. You've got a lot of people in London who are pro-Brexit. I think the country's much more nuanced and much more complicated. But I feel that what the country kind of yearns for in terms of, a progressive political party, as it were, is a party that's going to have its own identity, its own agenda, and just kind of go out there and fight for it. And I feel, for example, on Brexit, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in Hartlepool, because I was very critical of Labour backing the Tories' Brexit deal. Not because I think Brexit's a disaster, which I do, but because actually people don't believe that Labour are backing Brexit. And what you do when you're the opposition, you've got to be saying, and the line I would have taken on Brexit with the Tories is, okay, this is your deal. You're now going to own it. I'm not going to help you own it. I want you to succeed like I want you to succeed on COVID, but I'm going to call out every single thing that goes wrong with this because I'm going to pin it on you, as it does. And then you can oppose, and then you can start to shape a different
But
agenda.
Alistair, isn't there a case that a lot of people were just so sick to the back teeth of Brexit that they don't want the whole thing relitigated
It's not about
again?
relitigation. This is the argument I used to have with Ed about defending the record.
Shall I do?
You
I
were
won't do
there.
my Ed impression now. Don't worry.
Right. You were there in the room, and I kept saying, and Ed kept saying to me, and you kept saying to me, but we don't have enough time to relitigate the past on the crash. And I was saying, it isn't relitigation, it's explaining the context. And the point about, I'm not saying relitigate Brexit, but how can it be? Just last week, you had a situation where the Food and Drink Federation was saying pork, beef, cheese, 80% down in terms of exports. Now, unless we had said, oh, we're just going to park Brexit, that would and should have been big in the national debate. So these things are happening. And because we've said, oh, it's litigating Brexit, we don't debate them, we don't talk about them, we don't expose the government for the lies that they told to get to this. So I think to win in the future, you have to have ideas for the future, but I think you also have to win arguments about the past and how we got here.
Well, from one referendum to another referendum, Indie Ref 2 is very much back on the political agenda. I've just been speaking to Sir John Curtis about the new Alex Salmond Party. Do you think the Labour Party should rethink its strategy on a second referendum in Scotland?
Oh my God! I'll tell you some of the most stressful rereading bits in this book are the Scottish referendum in 2014,
which very much
and
paved the way, by the way, I think, to a lot of what's happened over the 6 years.
I agree. I totally agree. I think that, I'll tell you one thing, for example, I think that the SNP actually did pave the way in terms of the way that social media was starting to change politics. And I think the Tories have learned a lot from that. I think that it's paved the way in terms of this sense of English nationalism driving Brexit and Scottish nationalists actually getting a kind of boost out of that. I think also that, what we've seen recently with, you and I lived through the kind of the Tony Gordon years, and at their best together, they were absolutely formidable. Sturgeon and Salmond at their best together, formidable. Look at it now, and it's, it doesn't look great. But I think that I was very interested by John Major's piece in the Financial Times today. I don't know if you saw that. He's written a piece basically saying that Boris Johnson can't just sit there and say there can never be a referendum. I am.
So do you think Labour should, if let's say there is this supermajority which is returning, we'll have to see how it plays out.
Ayesha, couldn't you see that I was waffling to avoid the question?
Yes, I know, but see, this is couldn't you see I'm quite good, even though we're friends, I'm quite good at my job and I could spot the waffle. Come on, Alistair.
Yeah.
We've just had a discussion about not being in touch with people, and clearly the constitutional question is an issue for people in Scotland.
The truth is, I am conflicted. And every time I say that, I get my friends up in Scotland, Douglas Alexander and Brian Alexander and Brian Wilson and all these guys say, you try living up here and it's bloody awful and the Scottish government's terrible. But what I say about this is that look, as you know, my family background is all Scots. I've got lots of relatives still up there. I've got lots of friends still up there. I've just noticed a shift. I've noticed a big shift in the way people that think and talk and feel. And I was talking the other day to a German correspondent who works in London, and she's been up in Scotland making lots of films, and she said she came back absolutely convinced that the thing's moved. So what you'd say if you were Scottish Labour, and listen, I really like Ian Murray, who's Scotland's one Labour MP up there, and I think he's a great guy. I think he's a great campaigner. And he's another one who says, why do you keep sort of dipping the toe in the waters with these terrible people, blah, blah, blah. But I think if you're talking about being in touch, you have to at least accept that mood has shifted.
So I'm gonna prompt you, but we've only got about 30 seconds left, but I'm gonna prompt you. So are you saying, through all that waffle, my friend, are you basically saying that it's time for Labour to shift its position and let the people of Scotland decide?
I'm saying that I think it'll be hard for Labour to rebuild itself in Scotland as, if you like, the leading voice of the union, because they can't be the leading voice of the union, because that's going to be the Tories. And I think one of the things that comes through in the diaries is that damage that we did to ourselves, we the Labour Party, by seeming to be in bed with Cameron and Osborne Tories. Well, Johnson Gove Tories are 100 times worse.
So so what are you
So I
saying,
didn't answer the
Alistair?
question.
You
I'm
didn't
not
answer.
answering the question, Ayesha.
You're
I'm not
not
answering the
answering the
question
question.
because I'm not provoking these text messages that I get from all my friends in Scotland. I want a quiet life.
You want
I
a
just want
quiet
you to.
life.
I just want you to recognise that in the
I,
next volume,
I,
I'll flesh out your personality in much more than
well,
6
that is
mentions.
the main thing. The rule of six. I was very pleased about the rule of six.